Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt here, joined by Matt Continetti, head of domestic policy studies at the American Enterprise Institute. He's also a contributing columnist for Commentary Magazine, on which podcast he appears almost every day, and to the Free Press. And he's got a new backdrop, which I find very winsome and exciting, Matt. You've changed it up, and I like it. I want to start with Operation Arctic Frost. Now, Matt, you don't know anything about Watergate except what you read. You couldn't have lived it. You didn't see the Watergate hearings. I want a Watergate-style select committee in the Senate, maybe Lindsey Graham in the chair, diving deep into Arctic frost, because I'm shocked by this. What was your reaction to yesterday's press conference?
I was equally shocked, Hugh. I think it's a huge story. The idea that the FBI is surveying 160 some Republicans, including numerous members of Congress, senators. The list of senators that Chairman Grassley uncovered being surveyed included Dan Sullivan of Alaska, Cynthia Loomis. These are not, to the barricade MAGA types. These are Republican senators that somehow they were getting scooped up in this investigation. And Chuck Grassley himself is someone who's been in this role investigating abuses of the federal government and executive branch for decades. And he's shocked and alarmed by what his investigators have uncovered as part of Arctic frost. So I think hearings are warranted. I would also add, this has been kind of a bombshell week when it comes to Congress and Congress's investigations and testimony. We had this Arctic frost revelation. We had the auto pen scandal report from Comer's committee in the House. And we had a very good hearing in Congress yesterday on political violence on the left. So even though the government is shut down, Congress is bringing, I think, important facts and information to light.
I think the auto pen might actually play into the select committee, if it is stood up, into their investigations of who was running what. Because in my view, Jack Smith is a rando. It's absolutely odd that he would be picked to come from The Hague and run this thing. And I think we're going to find strings over to the White House if they dig deep. The procedural obstacle is Chuck Grassley is chair of Judiciary. He and Ron Johnson found this out. The select committee with subpoena power focuses the media on one storyline like the Watergate Select Committee did. And I would staff it with Graham and Cotton and Cruz and Lee and John Kennedy and Eric Schmidt, lawyers, Josh Hawley. They got a lot of great lawyers in the Senate. And I would bring in prosecutors to be the counsel, not the Judiciary Committee staff. There will be institutional pushback against that. What do you see as the pro and cons of going outside of the ordinary structure like they did with Watergate?
Well, you listed some of them about kind of, will the culture of the Senate be willing to accommodate this type of extraordinary committee, which has Watergate as its precedent. But we live in extraordinary times. And the lesson of the Trump presidency is you need the bold move. You need to establish facts on the ground. And setting up the committee like you suggest, that's a bold, decisive move. It will gain attention. And yeah, some people who are incumbents in the process might not like it, but we need to take swift and I think action that can be seen visibly in order to garner attention here. So I think that we're reminded of the failures of the Biden administration and the deep, deep failures of governance in the Biden administration by both these scandals. One, the idea of the auto pen, the idea that President Biden was not really running the country, certainly not toward the end of his administration, and perhaps for far longer. And then here, Arctic frost, this sense that the Justice Department, elements within the FBI, and as we know from even some of the other national security agencies, viewed themselves as partisan actors who deemed half the country as engaged in a potentially criminal enterprise, and therefore were willing to take these just remarkable measures, searching the cell phones of Republican congressmen for metadata. That can't go without serious questioning and serious answers. So Biden, gave a speech last week, Hugh, where he talked about dark times in this country. But I think he was looking in the rearview mirror. And I think when people are reminded of what the Biden administration was like, they see a lot of value in the current Trump administration.
I'm going to talk with Matt Continetti during the break. He's coming back on the other side because we got to talk about the president meeting with the general secretary in China. During the break, I'll talk to him about Mamdani and a little bit more on the select committee. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Welcome back. I am joined by Matt Continetti. Matt, I worked for Richard Nixon twice, each time for 2 years when he was alive, and then went back a third time after he died in order to run the foundation. But I learned everything I know about Watergate, not from him, but from Jeff Shepard, who wrote The Nixon Conspiracy after years of laboring in the archives and FOIA requests. Have you ever read The Nixon Conspiracy?
I haven't, but I have listened to one of your recent interviews with Mr. Shepard, and he was very insightful.
That book is a revelation of what committees, select committees, can do, so I recommend it to you. I was just on Fox talking about Chuck Schumer not endorsing Mamdani, and I made the argument Mamdani is the best thing ever to happen to Chuck Schumer because AOC, if she runs against him, is going to be glued to Mamdani, and Mamdani is going to be a disaster. Is that why Chuck Schumer is refusing to endorse him? Because he's actually a very liberal Democrat, but he's not nuts.
I think that Chuck Schumer is refusing to endorse him because even for Chuck Schumer, it would be some bridge too far to endorse a candidate who's clearly anti-Semitic, who has turned this race into an attack on the Democratic Party, an attack on Israel, who's the recent video that surfaced from a few years ago where Zoran Mamdani said that every time NYPD boot is on your neck, it goes back to the IDF. This is someone who's obsessed with Israel and Jews. He's a socialist. His ideas make no sense. He's going to be a disaster if he's elected mayor of New York City, even for Chuck Schumer. And that's too much. So I think that's why he's avoided endorsing him. But I will say, Hugh, Schumer doesn't deserve a Profile in Courage award here. He should be actively campaigning against Mamdani, warning the country about him, and doing everything he can to ensure that Mamdani doesn't set foot in Gracie Mansion, but instead Schumer's just keeping silent.
Yeah, Commentary Podcast and this radio show has been telling everyone who will listen, Mamdani is a nightmare and it doesn't work. And the early voting is pretty heavy. By historical standards, it's very, very much heavier than it was 4 years ago. It was Eric Adams, Curtis Sliwa, and I think Republicans are figuring out vote for Cuomo. Do you have any hope of that he loses on Tuesday? Mamdani loses on Tuesday?
You always have to have hope. Hope is like oxygen. You need it. The heavy turnout is interesting. It means that maybe some of these pollsters aren't quite modeling the electorate correctly. A lot depends on where the turnout's coming from. If it's coming from the more pro-Cuomo precincts in the primary, that's a good sign for Cuomo. You do hear anecdotal evidence, like you suggest, Hugh, that some Republicans, when faced with the reality of a Mamdani mayoralty, have decided to vote for Cuomo. So there's a chance. I am saying there's a chance.
I'm saying there's a chance
into the election with Mamdani the favorite.
We look at anti-Semitic communist who's never run anything more than 10 people versus Andrew Cuomo is the least liked guy in New York, and he ran the state, which has 155. It's not a tough call, actually.
How did we end up with these options? Only in New York,
I don't know,
kids.
But
only in New York.
Poor New York. I'm coming right back with Matt on the other side. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Matt Continetti is still with me. Matt, President Trump has completed this extraordinary trip to Malaysia, Japan, South Korea, and his summit with Xi Jinping, which he said was a 12 on a scale of 10. He's also put out a Truth Social saying we're going back to testing our nuclear weapons. I don't know what it means, whether that means underground testing or just testing of the vehicles. What did you make of the last week for Donald Trump?
That was a very successful trip to Asia, his first in his second term. I think what Trump is doing is showing that America can begin to prepare for a situation where we are at conflict, a kinetic conflict with China. And you prepare for that situation by strengthening your alliances with your Pacific friends. So that he had a wonderful trip to Japan, a wonderful trip to South Korea. He recently hosted the Australian Prime Minister in Washington. That was a good meeting. So he's solidifying ties with our friends. You also do it by decreasing your dependence on China for rare earths. So he made a variety of rare earth agreements with our allies. And he's also, of course, lessening regulations at home, Hugh, in order to develop our own minerals, of which America has a bountiful supply. It's only because of green regulations that we've constricted ourselves from competing with China in this domain. And he went finally to meet with President Xi Jinping, the Chinese dictator, and he came in and he said, look, those rare earth controls that China was threatening were so damaging to the world, not just to America, that we were prepared to levy an additional 100% tariff. And as a result of that threat, China has agreed not to impose these controls for a year. And we've had some other promises from China as well in terms of buying American agricultural products and working to clamp down on fentanyl. But with all such dealings and negotiations with the Chinese Communist Party, we have to look for compliance. We have to make sure that these are just not empty promises, but that the Chinese Communist Party actually acts on what it promised President Trump. And so I don't view this as a grand bargain. I see it as one further step in this ongoing competition between the United States and China to define the 21st century.
The good news is Taiwan was not mentioned by anyone. And the bad news is Jimmy Lai was not mentioned by anyone. Now, we would not expect them to do diplomacy about Taiwan in public. They might have talked about it in private. And dissidents were never released in a way that would embarrass, in the Soviet days, Solzhenitsyn and Sharansky, they were not released in ways that embarrassed the Kremlin. So I have to hope it comes to it. Do you think the soybean deal is a precursor of a Cold War, not unlike us selling the Russians wheat? Instead, this time China's buying our soybeans?
I think it's very similar. China was a big export market for our farmers. The farmers are an important constituency for President Trump. And so China quite consciously has reduced its purchases of American soybeans and other agricultural supplies in order to show that they have leverage in this struggle. And so their pledge to resume the purchases of American agricultural products is a win for President Trump. I am cautious, however, because I recall the Phase 1 trade deal in Donald Trump's first term, which was agreed to toward the end of 2019. The Chinese there also made pledges to buy U.S. agricultural products. And of course, within a few months, we had the COVID, the CCP's cover-up of COVID, and an economic standstill globally, and China never delivered on its promises. So I think President Trump, of course, remembers that well, too. And I think what we'll see is, in the coming weeks, this isn't really over. It's going to be a constant back and forth between the two powers. And President Trump even said, look, he's planning on visiting China in April of 2026. And so that's kind of the next milestone here in the ongoing relationship. But I will say, I think President Trump deserves credit. He's the person who put the People's Republic of China on the political map as a power that is not just a responsible stakeholder, as presidents of both parties characterized it as in the past, but as an actual competitor and threat to the United States. He did that in 2015, and he's followed up on it. And some of his methods are not the favored methods of the political class here in D.C. Tariffs, these new kind of investments our government is making in critical industries and critical minerals and other commodities. They just signed a deal for nuclear reactors with Westinghouse, an investment by the federal government. That's not liked by the political class, but I see it as part of an overall strategy, Hugh, to get the American government in a position where, should we go to war with China, China can't cut us off and thus end the war on their terms immediately.
Yeah, if you want to prevent war, prepare for peace. Oldest saying in the book. But you lead me to my exit question, and I always disclose to the audience I own Palantir. I don't own NVIDIA. NVIDIA and the Blackwell chip teamed up with Palantir in one of the more amazing displays I've ever seen on a technology platform. Do you think we're winning the AI race the way that NVIDIA's CEO says we are, and Palantir is the ubiquitous software of the future?
I think that AI is one of the domains where we continue to have an edge over China. I think Jensen Huang is absolutely correct about that. And so it's important for us to maintain that edge. We have to think about how can we continue to out-innovate China. There are other domains where the Chinese have raced ahead of us. Electric vehicles, for example, batteries. I think the next domain where we're going to be fighting for prestige is robotics, where the Chinese have made great leaps. So when we're having this type of competition, we need to think about what are America's advantages. Well, one advantage we have is our military and our military technology, our nuclear arsenal. That's why it was very important for President Trump to announce that we would resume testing of our nuclear arsenal as a reminder to the world, and our AI advantage. And we need to do everything to press our advantages as we prepare for a potential conflict in order to avoid conflict.
Well said, as always, Matt Continenti. A happy Halloween to you. Talk to you again next week if we're lucky. Don't go anywhere, America. I'll be right back on the Hugh Hewitt Show.